quote?
I think it was, we have 15 people in the organisation who deal with risk and compliance, but only one dedicated to innovation, just saying.
Kind of tells a bit of the story of the health system, doesn't it? So I thought that was a good quote. I also thought there was another good quote. So I talked on the Wednesday after some guy from Microsoft who showed a bunch of fancy videos. It's like, production values, and put up a quote from Bill Gates, which was, "We tend to overestimate the change we can achieve in 2 years and underestimate the change we can achieve in 10. And so I thought that was really interesting, like a really interesting kind of quote. I used it to my advantage in my talk the following day. So I had to talk about remote patient monitoring. And I think remote patient monitoring is probably going to be one of those things that it's not going to happen quickly, like everywhere, but it's going to be one of those things that's going to be make healthcare super different in 10 years' time. So yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to someone from hey Cameron, how you doing?
Good, thanks.
Good. So I was talking to someone from the UK yesterday. They've built an app which does long COVID monitoring, and it kind of led me down a path of going, I think we've only kind of explored one angle of this. They're using wearable devices in terms of managing over-exercising, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So normally, you've got your Fitbit which says make sure you do your steps every day, and then it tries over time to slowly ramp up your exercise. Well, it turns out for people with long COVID, doing that actually makes things worse. So you should stay resting. And you'll know this with Matt, Mary.
Yep, for sure.
So basically
post-exertional malaise.
You've got it. So they've hacked some polar wearables to be reporting if you're doing too much exercise now, rather than doing more exercise, if that makes sense. So they've built this whole app around it for long COVID in order to help people. The guy was saying 90. So they did some market research when they were about to release the app, and 92% of I think they call it pacing. Is that right, Mary? Mm-hmm. 92% of people with long COVID wanted help with pacing because they found it really difficult to do. And I thought that was really interesting. And so that's why they've got this app, which helps them find multi-day trends of over-exertion, and then also with the wearable in order to give them immediate feedback on when they're going ahead of their kind of pacing target, which I thought was really interesting. It's kind of, we talk about, like I said, wearables with rings to complete, and you feel disappointed when you haven't completed your ring, and then next week it wants you to do more, and then it wants you to do more. Whereas this was kind of the opposite. Please stop, you're going too fast, or you're doing too much. So I thought, that kind of gave me a little bit of inspiration in that space. I got asked to try and work out what might help people from a long COVID perspective, in a technology space. And it was lacking a bit of motivation because I was like, I don't really know what we could do, because it seemed quite hard and quite big. But anyway, that's a bit of a ramble there, just to open us up. How's your day been, Ben? What have you been looking at today? Anything interesting?
Do I get in trouble if I say no? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Are we still working? Yeah, no. I have been. What I've been doing this morning, I was reviewing the Hira doc that they've got for the work that you've commented on as well too, about looking at getting the trying to get a actual legal opinion on all things to do with consent and sharing of information and privacy. So yeah, there's a scope of work happening in around that. Reviewing that, I have been starting to tidy up the.
Did you like my rule of thumb that I put in my comment?
Yours was good. I mean, I don't know if you'll see because it's on the same one. I just pretty much went out there and I said, yep, I just told Toka what you said, and yeah, and just sort of said, so, yeah, particularly around that they need to be thinking about definitely the ethics, the plain English side of things in terms of anything that comes back through, and I think you say that, obviously people need to understand how the stuff works in a tech environment as well too, and also I think I mean, I don't know. I think the two key areas that I think we know there's still a really grey area in this space at the moment is child's access to and control of information, and particularly that transition from youth into adulthood. That's the really sort of, you know, grey area. And I know that they've had conversations with some of the lawyers on that. I know I believe there are some guidelines out there about it, but again, there's nothing. I would say even that there's some slightly conflicting information in that space, and then it doesn't line up with what vendors go and implement within theirs, I think, as Rosie pointed out in her research. So yeah, so I think that's.
I was going to say the key observation I made was I work on, you know, if you're going to ask someone to produce something, the first number I start to go to is if you've asked someone to do some work and it's $50,000, $1,000 a page is very expensive. So it better be more than 50 pages of something. Do you know what I mean? So I then go, well, and granted, it might be hard to come up with a page number reference for the quality of work. And Cameron, you'll probably have an opinion on this. But like as a rule of thumb, $1,000 feels a lot for a page of content. And so, you know, that to me starts to be how I judge the value of things, where the output is a piece of paper or a document of some description. I don't know what you think about that, Cameron. Is that a really bad rule of thumb?
I think really sort of I mean, coming from a sort of a software product space, value should be sort of measured not by the outputs, but the outcome.
Yeah.
What you actually get at, like if that page of information actually like saves a million lives or something, then obviously that's a very valuable 100%. Page. So,
and if it's been wonderfully distilled and it's incredibly easy to understand, and there's a nice simple explanation of some complex spaces.
I think the key problem is that this is before we've commissioned it and trying to figure out how much money it's going to cost. And so in my head, that's kind of how I think about it. Does that make sense? So if you're going to spend 50 grand and you get 10 pages of content, even if it's the best content in the world, I wonder if that's 50 grand's worth of work. It's an interesting kind of question.
I think the thing to me with it too, with that, when they're looking at it, is that, you know, they're sort of talking about that basically, because to me it's kind of like it sort of tells us the constraints within which you can then sort of work with them, because it's like, you know, this is what people can and cannot do legislatively, and then we'll sort of see what control we can give them within there. But I think the other thing that I would really want to make sure that they're looking at is, you know, they talked about at a high level, it's like, and then meeting the, you know, and then being informed by what, you know, the people will want in this space, and they've talked across the board. And I'm like, I think what the clinicians and the health sector is going to want out of sharing information versus us as the people and the citizen are going to be two completely separate. You know, I think those needs at times may not always align. So I think they need to be, I've just sort of called out, I think that they need to actually be considering those as not necessarily two separate groups, but just being very aware of the fact that, there may be competing behaviors or motivations.
So kind of just to kind of recap on what this actually is. Essentially, there's no one's kind of written a legal opinion on the Health Information Privacy Code from a kind of a provider perspective, like a Te Whatu Water kind of perspective. And so this is kind of going through the Health Information Privacy Code and going, if you were to interpret kind of cases and case law and the rules themselves conservatively, you should be acting in this way. And if you want to consider it liberally, you could act in this way. And here's kind of the pros and cons to both of those approaches. So, you know, if it's secondary uses of data for research and you wanted to approach it conservatively, you would only ever use anonymous data. You would ask everybody for their permission to be a part of the research project, but that'll probably, you know, and you'd have an opt-in process, but that'll probably mean you hardly ever find anyone and can hardly ever get anyone for research. And the other end is, you know, you kind of just do whatever you want. You don't anonymize the data and you don't ask people for permission. And the consequence of that is lots of people, you know, on occasion, you're going to end up in the news but it's probably okay legally. But next time someone will find out faster. So it's kind of across all of that, trying to figure out where are I think probably the legal boundaries, isn't it, Ben, in the first instance, but there's kind of, as you said, overlap with ethics as well there. And then there's kind of the impacts of choosing those extreme positions. So we think that'll be quite good. It's just trying to figure out if you've got someone doing legal analysis in general. It's I've got friends that are lawyers and used to be lawyers, and they love to be paid by the word or by the hour or by the page, regardless of the quality.
I think my concern on this might be, I mean, they've got a decent scope of work in there, but it's also, giving an opinion on these, like, how many user cases and scenarios could you come up with across the entire health system? Like, this is potentially pretty big, and so to be, again, like, how do you prioritize that? Or again, like, do you go and go, cool, well, if we can tackle the most complex ones, actually that'll give us the answers for the more sort of straightforward transactional sort of nature of services that might come through. And the other thing I'll just quickly mention, because I've got a couple of people here, the marvelous Mary and Kimberly, who've been involved in it too, is that just starting to tidy up our notes from all the interviews that we've been doing over the last 2 to 3 weeks with the abortion service providers, as part of the abortion reform work that we're working with the ministry on, and that's around looking to understand the needs for and around what timely and equitable access to the services mean. And the initial interviews / we'll just say actually discussions and like building these relationships with the providers have been excellent, and there's been some good gold out of it. And depending on who we're talking to, I think, like even just getting a chance to talk to a GP yesterday who was new to the service, like there was some stuff that came out of that we hadn't heard from any of the previous providers. So it's been it just goes to show the value of talking to people. And that's me on my bit. And if Mary or Kimberly sort of want to give anything that sort of stood out to them on that,
Kimberly?
I was going to say that's a classic thing where most of those clinics are run in hospitals. I think, Ben, most of the abortion clinics are run in hospitals.
Yes.
Yeah, and so most of the the people that work in them are kind of hospital people, if you know what I mean. So useful to get like a primary care lens on a service which kind of operates in the grey between the hospital and the community. So yeah, I'm not surprised you got quite a different opinion, because probably quite a different worldview, I would say, a GP coming into a service like that.
Yeah, and also how a lot of the younger GPs coming through are keeping away from it just from not knowing enough, but also not having the emotional maturity to have the conversations as well.
Okay.
It scares them a bit to take on as a service. So
and the older GPs as well as the younger,
and the older
as well.
GPs. Yeah.
So there's a sweet spot of like in the middle somewhere.
Yeah, I think
too young, not too old, like Goldilocks type stuff.
The emotional one was really interesting, because it was that it's not just a clinical training, and again, because that would be the thing with this. You could have if you were to produce a report that said an insight is they need more training, I think the default would be everyone would go like, cool, well, here's all the clinical how to go and do this procedure. But actually a lot of it was also about the emotional safety, both of the patients and the GPs, those providing the service themselves. And it's like, cool, because that's a different type of training and consideration, and what are the opportunities there. So it's very exciting. Anyway, sorry, Kimberly, Mary, back to you.
I mean, yeah, just that was among one of the pieces of gold in that chat yesterday.
I think the other interesting one was of the opinion that for cultural safety, that in this situation they may not wish to speak with people from their own cultural background, because if their community is quite small, they want to talk to someone impartial. So having the opportunity to talk to someone else was quite interesting.
Yeah, so we assume, so it's funny in the health system, we're now training ourselves to assume that Māori people want Māori services. Do you know what I mean? Or Pacific people want Pacific services. Sometimes that might be not true. So yeah, interesting. Mary, have you seen anything on the internet in the last couple of weeks?
Today I was just watching, it was on One News, if anyone saw about the cyber knife, which is the new,
It's a good name anyway.
I know, it's
Is that like
more
is that one of the weapons from the new Avatar film? No.
Totally, that's what it is. So it's in a New Zealand first, a high-tech robotic cancer treatment machine has become treating patients in a private Auckland clinic. So it, bear with me because I only watched the video, so I'm trying to look at all the text that goes with it.
Is it a LINAC?
It's, what's a LINAC?
Like a radiation therapy machine.
It's a LINAC on a robotic arm, basically.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
But they can give higher doses in a more precise way, so then it reduces the number of treatments required to a maximum of 5, which are completed within a week. I thought that's cool. So they've actually had to reinforce the walls of the suite that it's held in because of the amount of radiation that it gives. But it's been big for more precise, bear with me, of certain types of brain, spine, and prostate cancers.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Presumably it can kind of do better angles.
Oh yeah. It showed all the pivoting and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So they've been trying for the last 2 years to come through. So at the moment, I think it's at Mercy Radiology and mostly just for private patients, but they're hoping that they can do some sort of public-private partnership with the DHBs at some point, or the districts.
Yeah. Fascinating, that radiation therapy space, because it is very much trying to be as targeted as possible within the constraints of how bulky the machine is, basically, and how like tightly you can put the beam across somebody.
Yep.
So yeah, it's fascinating sciencey thing, and there's a whole lot of people in a hospital who are basically experts in physics, Michael? Like in a sense, like they're basically physicists that work in the health system, and their job is to manage radiation safety, pretty much.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So there's the TAT program, which I can't remember what TAT, which is around training a sustainable workforce out of physics from university and turning them into applied medical physicists. So they're actually using that physics information to sort of guide and cross-check patient treatment plans. So that cyber knife, I know they talked about on that news article, I think it was 9 physicists involved in actually commissioning that, because it's you talked about the bunker thickness, and they do all the calculations for that, and then the patient treatment, what else are they irradiating, how do we minimize that effect, and what does it look like? So there's heaps of computational Monte Carlo simulations, which is it's quite cool, the applied physics and that side of things, which is good.
Isn't it real funny that we have care like that delivered in the health system, and then we have talking therapies? I was at a workshop on Tuesday morning with kind of mental health people from around the sector wanting to do more digital mental health, and it was funny because we know online CBT is effective, so then there's evidence that it's effective, but no one's kind of joined up that question of how much the user experience, the channel you experience, how complete the experience is, how much that affects outcomes, and how cost effective it is, and how you might boost effectiveness by something which is really common in mobile apps, which are reminders. Do reminders to do CBT impact on the effectiveness of that CBT tool, or does gamification affect the effectiveness of CBT? And presumably gamification looks, the reason there's lots of games, free to play games in an app store, is because lots of people like different games and they like different types of gamification, which is, how do you find the right type of combination of all of those factors overlaid on a service of online CBT to kind of get effectiveness? And the conversation kind of stalled when I said, so have you got like evidence that you're making these people better when they're doing online CBT? And the answer was, well, we're only just starting to do an evaluation now, because you've kind of got this lag where you build something and the CBT, you do it over 8 or 12 weeks or whatever, and then suddenly you're only just starting to get outcomes from that first person. And so you've kind of got this problem of you have to put it into production in order to be able to test it, but then you've got a lag between putting it in and then finding the outcomes. A classic problem of healthcare where outcomes aren't immediate. They're not overnight outcomes in general. So I thought that was quite an interesting conversation with them, that we're still exploring whether or not and how much some of those online tools actually work, or how beneficial they are and who they're beneficial for. And it feels like we're getting a lot of news on the TV or whatever about, oh, we don't have enough, online mental health services, or they're the wrong ones or whatever. And you talk to the providers directly, and they're still struggling to kind of gather enough data to say, yes, ours is definitely good, and it makes a big difference. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then you got a mixed methods one question. So obviously face-to-face CBT versus online CBT, and the online one's probably pretty structured and pretty, paint by colors, whereas, in person it's, highly customized to the individual. And presumably there's a mixed methods thing in between. So some of it's person to person, some of it's, the patient with the machine types thing. I'd be interested in whether that combined model was more effective than either one of those by themselves, because obviously face-to-face CBT, you can only have so many of those a week. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't, unless you're a gazillionaire, healthcare costs too much for that. Whereas online's cheap, but it might not be as good. So, do you get like some sort of sweet spot in the middle? Like, I think like some of the projects we've seen where, like what Maggie Lee's work is around swallowing training, or physios do, or new exercise training, the more you do it, the better it is. But of course you have to do it properly in order for you to get the benefit as well. So interesting thing and interesting conversation. We were talking about whether we should be looking to try and measure or compare a couple of tools against each other as well in terms of outcomes. So it's not just trying to see that a tool is better, but trying to measure the differences between the tools themselves. A/B testing, I think you call it, Kimberly, don't you, in your design world? Very good. So we've now got a cyber knife in the country, and our problems are all solved. I love it.
Yeah, it was pretty impressive. I do suggest you check out the video.
The video, yeah.
I want to see. I've just done both Michael and Cameron in the chat what they're up to. So they've just dropped in there in terms of what they're working on at the moment. I just kind of there's small elements of that with both the eye care faster work that I just dropped in there as well too, Michael. So obviously, I mean, that's not about the bloods and tube, but that, yeah, in this case, actually being able to do the analyzer without having to send the bloods away for the tests for the EDs, which I guess, yeah, kind of takes away that problem. And there is, I'm not quite sure what they're working through around the clinical training for the authentication on that as well, Mary, because, there's still just how they scan into the analyzer device itself, and it's done, and whether that then gets sort of opened up to what, like nurse registrars or anyone like that. Yeah, sorry, Michael, over here.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Like, so we were involved in that from ED just to have a look at. So it's an international problem. That's getting the wrong blood and tube, and there's some really good stuff out there, papers, and they've done full risk assessments, FMEAs, and all sorts of stuff on the process, and but still there's that risk, as I suppose we've been asked, which is really exciting for us from an engineering perspective, to look at a process from a really outside point of view, just look at it. And so
how big's the problem, Michael? How often does it happen?
Yeah, good question. So I suppose the bigger question is how many times have we had in there miss, and we've it hasn't happened. Like, I mean, some of the actual problems have been picked up.
But is that the process failing or the process working?
Yeah, so this is what we're discovering is, have we got a too rigid process to fit within how we're doing it, and we're always going to fail, or do we need to have it, and this is what I suppose some of that problem is around prescribing processes and applying them to every situation that we're going to set ourselves up to fail. And I suppose we're doing a bit of discovery work around what that looks like from a engineering perspective. So mapping it out as a linear, where are the touch points that we could actually discover that we've got the wrong blood in the tube, and what does that look like, and do some observation work, which is great because it's puts us in the clinical setting, and plus we're non-clinical, so we can ask dumb questions and all of those sort of things that those discovery moments, and then have a look at rather than the obvious problem is throw some technology at it and fix it straight away, but what is actually the real problem? So
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's so the only thought I've got around it, Michael, and I don't know, you've probably looked at this, is the ultimate arbiter of whether or not the blood coming out of somebody's arm is actually that person's blood, is the person themselves. Do you know what I mean? So you've kind of got this question of the more you do with the person, and granted some people are unconscious, or aren't able to help, the more you do in front of that person, I think the better. Does that make sense? Because otherwise, the more you take it away to do stuff, the more likely it is that person hasn't, because they're going to be looking at what you're doing the whole time. Think about a patient, you go and you take their blood, like they're watching what you're doing all the time that you're in the room with them, so.
Or not in some people's case.
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. But it was more just, like you've kind of got this
awareness,
other pair of eyes that would know that their blood's just come out of them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or it didn't. So.
So that we call that work imagined. That's brilliant when that all lines up. In reality, I suppose through some observations that other people have made and the processes that they'll just get into that process, and then the person next door yell out, "I've fallen out of bed, can you quickly come around?" And then there's a disruption, or they might have a couple and they take them back to the nurse's station to fill out the paperwork because it's easier to do there.
But the interesting solution to that might be if you had the tubes in every bed space. So why do they take them back to the nursing station? Because at the end of the day, that's where they have to put them into the machine. Do you know what I mean? And so maybe that's your risk, is you should be gathering them from each of the rooms rather than gathering them from a central station. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I know they've done some work to try and fix that. They've got the tubes in the room plus somewhere to write in the room on that. Yeah, so it's all
no. I mean not the vacutainers. I mean like the actual
the Lamson tubes.
Yeah.
The
other
thing
I mean? So then you've got
like,
kind of an end-to-end process in the point of care.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so we're looking at that from a woe to go, from the request all the way through to the getting it back. One of the interesting ones is like, have we even got patient ID on patient bracelets? And that's a bigger problem than just the wrong blood and tube. That's have we cut the wrong leg off? Have we got the all of those sort of things. It's quite fascinating, just the really simple things of sticking a label on, like your airport baggage. You'd never put your bag on the conveyor belt without knowing that you've put that label on the handle.
See, but that's you. So when you look at like Air New Zealand, it'd be a really interesting question to ask them, I think. Has the accuracy of baggage tracking gone up since, in New Zealand they have people put their own bag tags on? Has accuracy gone up since then or down?
Yeah, that would be an interesting question. Yeah.
Because presumably that's, but presumably it's something that they will have thought about a bit, I would say.
Yeah.
Rather than a third party putting it on. Yeah. Oh, totally. Like, I think all of that, Cameron, is stuff that we probably brush over in the health system without actually thinking about the problem enough. Do you know what I mean? Like, we know what the problem is, but we kind of don't think creatively enough about what the answer might be. So.
Yeah, and I suppose that's for us. That's why we're taking a step back and just looking at what is the process. Write it down in I like flow diagram. So Bruce has done a really good piece of work of just actually prescribing inputs and outputs, and then looking at what the perfect process would look like, and then at least measuring against it, making a change, and then coming back to that process. And but yeah, it amazes me that we're still thinking about these sort of things. We've been taking 100%. Blood for how long,
100%. Been asking about analogous examples. One that comes to mind is, when people apply for an immigration visa, or people apply for a passport, like those are enormously kind of consequential processes, and there's a physical separation kind of method that's used for that. Do you know what I mean? So stuff goes in a folder and nothing else can go in that folder, and all of those folders are all held separately. And it still happens. So I'm trying to think of situations where, are there any situations where it's like end-to-end guaranteed that thing that started as yours at the end? And I'm not really sure I can think of anything. I don't know, Tan, if you've got any thoughts. End-to-end processes where it starts as your thing and ends as your thing, guaranteed. Couriers is probably, like, the amount that couriers screw up.
Yeah.
Probably don't want to follow their business model.
Especially around Christmas.
Especially when it's busy. Is it worse when it's busy, maybe? So yeah. Oh, sounds interesting, Michael. I always wonder, like, medicines is probably another process that's similar, I would imagine. And there's lots of controls around that. And I would argue that maybe the near misses are the process working rather than the process failing. Which it's a catch for the process, because we know that the people would have errors.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. That's good. I'll follow up on some of those ideas.
You don't have to raise your hand to speak, Ben.
I'm sorry, just trying to be polite. So Cameron, I'm curious, like, so what does a personalized experience for clinicians look like?
Well, there's a lot of different options that we're sort of thinking about. Like there's the sort of the standard UI ones like dark mode, but there's also the sort of the more advanced options where potentially, instead of having like a page of like clinical guideline information, if it's a page that a clinician has been looking at quite frequently, then we could potentially assume or infer that they're just going back to look for a specific like drug information. They're not actually looking for the entire narrative of the pathway. So we could actually be like doing a summary at the top of like referral information or drug information, because that's probably what people are more likely to go back to. And also, custom themes for accessibility, like maybe if the GP is colorblind, or some description, things like that, essentially. Also, like, if you wanted to have personalized analytics, like if you're curious to see what are the pathways you've looked at the most over the last 6 months, and you could favorite particular pathways, just stuff like that. Yeah.
This is great, Cameron. I wholeheartedly support this plan. I posted in the chat, people like you like pathways like this. So something that might be interesting. So I talked at an IDAM thing a few weeks ago, and I think the interesting thing for me in this is identifying who those clinicians are. So we're just about to go and talk to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. I've been gathering this because the way the Health Information Privacy Code, see how that loop works. We started talking about the Health Information Privacy Code, and now we're already back there. Basically, the only people we're allowed to assign unique identifiers to in the health system in relation to delivering healthcare are registered health professionals and registered under the the Health Practitioners Competency Assurance Act. So therefore, for example, not social workers, speech language therapists aren't allowed a CPN and or an HPI, which doesn't make any sense. So we're gathering up what are we using the HPI for at the moment, and whether or not that, whether we would get value, and whether there is value from being able to give CPNs or HPIs to people that aren't registered health professionals. And I think the answer is yes, there is value, but we have to go and talk to the Privacy Commissioner to get them to change the privacy code to say something different than what it says at the moment. Because otherwise we're basically against the law, doing something against the law. But it's taken, I think, having this conversation 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Yeah, it's interesting in that sense that it's taken that long for us to try and get that laser-like focus about, hey, this is the problem. Here's why we need to solve the problem, and here's the conversation to go and start solving it. So yeah, so hopefully, Cameron, you in the new year, Q1 in the new year, the HPI will be allowed to add CPN numbers or people from across the entire health system. So, you know, you could then start changing your content to be from GP, and I don't know if you divide this up, GP versus nurse versus health, like a healthcare worker, like a Kaiafina type person, and presumably they would have different preferences in terms of what they want to read about things. To me, that would be really interesting. And then you've kind of got presumably got different language preferences as well. I don't know if you guys write anything in other languages or not, or is it all generally? I imagine it's all in English, is it?
Yeah, it is all in English. But we are going through a big equity project, so there's obviously going to be sort of things around there like te reo and commonly used te reo terms and like that. Would
you also then think about lots of websites these days have kind of like thumbs up, thumbs down comments on a page? Do you guys get much of that sort of? Do you have that built into Pathways?
Not thumbs up, thumbs down, but every page has a feedback button. Which can be used for like feedback on the clinical content or just feedback on the actual software itself. So
and then so how many of them would you get like a week? Like how many comments would you get a week?
I'm not actually sure because those the feedback actually goes directly back to the regional partners. It goes back to the groups themselves. So we as a company and Streamliners, we only get them back. Get them when it gets raised with us directly to say like, oh, you know, a GP's asked about this particular thing, because the majority of the feedback is around the clinical content itself.
I was just my thought would be presumably you get it at rate X because you're asking for quite a bit more than just a thumb up or a thumb down, and presumably if you've got a thumb up or a thumb down, you might get some much more subtle signals that you miss at the moment, if that makes sense. You won't get the reason, but it might point you at some stuff, I think, you know, because it's much easier to just click a button than it is necessarily to then type in what you were thinking, especially if you're busy, you know, like clinicians tend to be busy. So something that I kind of have an interest in, this question of social media has turned out to be a big win and big problem for the world. And as a health system, what can we learn from how that works in guiding human behavior that would help our clinicians work more efficiently? Because one of the things that I thought was, so I talked to Orion Health about this. If you look in a CDR, a clinical document repository in a hospital, where all of the clinic leaders are for a person, you can order them by which specialty wrote them, or you can order it by when it was written. But neither of those things tell you which letter has all of the relevant information that you want. Does that make sense? And so that comment I made, people like you like pathways like this, you know, it would be great if you could have a way to give feedback on clinic leaders. So, you know, and you look at the clinic leader and you give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Thumbs up, I think this is good. Thumbs down, I think it was a waste of time. And then over time, you've built up some sort of metadata relating to the content in your CDR, which then allows you to say, turns out radiologists in our hospital write really good reports and the pathologists write really terrible reports. Do you know what I mean? It's that sort of kind of conversation. Or this doctor in this service compared to everyone else gets lots of thumbs up and everyone gets thumbs down. And so that kind of starts to create a bit of a behavior change in a subtle way. Does that make sense? So it's kind of doesn't tell you why, but it does give you kind of comparative analysis or comparative statistics, which to me sounds like a really interesting kind of opportunity. And then so you go, show me in the CDR all the documents that are most liked for that patient. So, start reading from the most liked to the least liked. And presumably that's some sort of metric of accuracy, easy to read, or whatever the deemed qualities of that document are, which people identify. So to me, that's kind of a really interesting thing. And I've asked the question whether we can start having a think about that around the medical warning system. So the medical warning system collects information about lots of stuff, allergies and drug interactions, and ironically, well, not ironically, but the thing people complain about is next to that stuff, it's got this person's got a big black dog at their house. And so, for some people in the health system, that's completely irrelevant and they never want to see that. An anaesthetist doing a, a pre-surgical check doesn't give a crap if you've got a big black dog at your house, because they're not doing that work at your house. They're doing that in, in pre-op. And so, that data should always be available, but you shouldn't be showing the anaesthetist that information when they're doing a pre-op check. By contrast, being allergic to a specific anesthetic is never going to be an issue for a social worker working in the community, but she definitely wants to know that you've got a big black dog at your house before she knocks on the door. Do you know what I mean? So, that piece of information, completely useless to one person in the health system and hugely valuable to another. That question of how do you signal relevance separate to whether the information's right or not. So assume the information's right, but that question of, and this is where I think thumbs up and thumbs down, if you can assign it to an identity, gives you a really rich insight into that people like you like things like this question. And so you can start to then tune it as well. Other people said they like this page, or other people like you said they don't like this page. Tell us more. Do you know what I mean? So you can start to get like richer feedback from the people don't like the page, and you get more targeted on it. So anyway, that's just rant over, but that's kind of where I go in terms of, I think there's a lot we could be getting out of some of the stuff that we're not even scratching the surface. The last kind of thought I would make is Mirren McLeod, whose name might ring a bell, and if it doesn't, I'll send you an email after this. She works with us in Data and Digital, and she's working on trying to separate out the content from the channel and the experience. So you write a piece of content which describes what an abortion is. Sorry, relevant content from earlier. That's then saved, and then a bunch of people might want to be able to produce that on their website or show that on their website. And you guys kind of do this in health pathways anyway. You have a base pathway and then people modify the pathway. But it's kind of having that content as code. So I got very excited when we were in HINZ last week, because Precision Driven Health published a guide for doing data science in healthcare in New Zealand. And all of the content was published in GitHub as files in GitHub, and then it's rendered on the website. So the files that are in GitHub are rendered. So you can write pull requests for the content. And so it's kind of an open edit change process, which is cool, I think. It gives you kind of that ability to then take that same content and present it with a different kind of brand, or snippets of that, parts of that content. You might not want all of it. You might want information relating to medicines or information relating to whatever, and so you can kind of segment all of those pieces of content up. So that Mirren's doing that work, and it's largely related to patient-facing content, rather than kind of our content for us. But the other thought I've got, Cameron, sorry, and I'm just going to carry on because I'm just thinking of these things as I go. Have you guys got access to the HealthPoint API?
Potentially.
You know HealthPoint.
Yeah.
They've got a Fire API.
Yes.
For services.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was in there talk at HINZ. So.
Yeah. Because I wonder for you guys, they spend a bunch of time curating that service information, like what times are people open, what days are they open, what's the contact phone number in the website. You could probably stop collecting all of that information and just point at that API and serve that up. Do you know what I mean? Like that'd be way more efficient than trying to keep another copy of it.
Yeah.
And aligned to that, Ben, no, it wasn't you, it was someone else. Oh, Andrew Upton, actually. Andrew Upton was pointing me at there's MSD has exactly the same thing, which is published on the open data portal for the government, and they update it every day as well. So that's not health services, that's, call them social services or whānau ora services, and that's published as a spreadsheet, not a spreadsheet, but like a a flat CSV file. So you could pull that in, combine that with HealthPoint's API, and serve that on a page, and then you don't have to maintain it because someone else is, but you've kind of enriched your kind of presentation layer with data is up to date that you don't have to do anything.
Yeah, that was actually something I cornered. I can't find her business card now. I had it on my desk before. I think it was Samantha, who she gave the talk from HealthPoints, and
yeah,
my ears pricked up as soon as she started to talk about that. So I was immediately over to the booth and talking to them about APIs and things. So yeah,
100%. Yeah, to me, I think there's so much value in that sort of thing, in the sense that the less we duplicate content, the more we spend on making the content more relevant. Do you know what I mean? There was a Michael, I don't know if you know about this, but there's a procurement going on at the moment because all the hospitals get medicines information. Like there's like an online repository for update research into medicines, Meditext or something like that. I don't know, but it was. There's an email chain that I've now been copied into where everyone's like, what exactly is it? Because we've got the New Zealand formulary, we've got what's the other thing that BPAC does? Something else that they do, which is the codification of the formulary. We've then got the guys in Christchurch, Michael, that do the My Medicines thing. And then we've got the the Pharmac schedule. And then we've got this thing that I found out about today, and then we've got the MedSafe database, and I'm like, surely there's overlap between all of those things. We've got these 6 things that relate to medicines, and presumably there must be some sort of overlap between all of those things. Like we're a country of 5 million people and we're running 6 databases about medicines. Like surely we can reduce that number, or like how do we bring it together so everyone can work on it together, rather than, I've had to update the name paracetamol 50 times in 50 different places. So yeah, to me, there's got to work smarter in some of this stuff, I think.
I imagine that's a problem across the whole, with the Te Whatu Ora coming together around, there's we're doing the same thing, lots of different ways across a lot of these. Yeah.
And I think, funnily enough, Health Pathways is probably our best example as a health system of trying to work together. Do you know what I mean? And trying to reshare how we do things. And I think there's heaps more opportunity to do that, I suppose. So Ben always asks good questions. Who is the customer? What are they looking for in the pathway? And I think you guys do a really good job of that, Cameron, because it's interesting, Ben, because most of this is authored by people that do this work. So, GPs on a regular basis are the authors of the content for the pathways. But at the same time, there's kind of this, if it's 80% right, they'll take the 80% and won't tell you about the 20% that's wrong because they're too busy to tell you about the 20%. So you've kind of got that barrier to feedback kind of question, like how do you lower the barrier of feedback to almost be nil, but still be enough that you're not getting overwhelmed with it. And I think that to me is an interesting kind of question about thresholds, because if you we looked at Calm, so we built an app in 2019 for medicines, and at the time we didn't have like adverse reactions kind of monitoring in New Zealand in a very sophisticated manner. Like it's going to be much more sophisticated. But if you were a member of the public and you wanted to report your like an adverse reaction with a medicine, and it's still on MedSafe's website, like the amount of information you would have to provide, you basically need to be a doctor in order to be able to provide the information as a consumer that they've asked for. And you kind of like, and so I asked them how many consumers submitted information in 2018, and the answer was 14 people. So we've got 5 million people in the country. We have a feedback form for telling us when the medicines don't work properly, and only 14 people filled it out. So, you know, it's kind of heaps more clinicians filled it out, but at the same time, you know, you have to go to your clinician, tell them that you had a problem, or it has to be bad enough that you told them, and then they have to take the time to fill out the form. And so, yeah, you can start to see that barrier to provide feedback is an interesting one. Oh, and then if you've got identity as well, Cameron, you could actually do proactive reach outs for clinicians. So don't wait for them to say yes or no, I like this thing or I don't. You could send them a survey. Do you know what I mean? Like send them out a survey and go, what do you like the most? What do you dislike? You know?
Yeah, I mean, that is something that we're sort of considering, but we're also very conscious of the workload that GPs are don't want to be spamming them with
no, totally. But at the same time, you've kind of got, you know, that's kind of, you've got a reactive model and then you've got a proactive model. And I think kind of you need elements of both of those things, I think.
Yeah.
So yes, so question for us is whether we use My Health Account more generally for clinicians login, which is Azure B2C. So OAuth 2 / what's the other technology, Ben? OICD, that's the one. OICD compatible as one of the biggest IDPs.
Can I just say, asking the least technical person on the call is never a good idea. Ask the person who's got technical analyst in their title.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah,
very good.
I'll nod and smile.
So, is anything else interesting happening before Christmas for anyone?
I feel like we haven't heard from Tam, so.
No pressure.
No pressure, Tam. Just feel free to talk about what you're working on.
Okay. Joined me just start the digital pathology documentation, and now we try to build a standard, kind of like standard documentation to help the future projects. And if we got further projects, we can use this kind of documentation, kind of like a guidance to can guide us how to do the projects. Just follow the standards from our team. That's the thing. And because this one I haven't think about before, I don't know how to start. It's just like you build you want to achieve something, and at the same time you want to have a standard model for the future future projects. So it's hard to think about all the things in this single project, because for the digital pathology we may focus more on this project, but you need to think about later you may use that one for cancer, or maybe use that one for children or for elder people. So it's a little bit hard to think about a perfect solution. But I think during the work we can slowly build up this project and this documentation, and then we can, finally it's gonna works. Yeah, that's what we did last week.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So what's melting your head at the moment? So we just came from an hour-long talk about this, where you obviously, when you run like a machine learning or an AI project, you've got a set of steps that we go through for the project. But my question to Tan and documentation I want to do is, what are all the reusable things for the next project and the next project? What do you think is going to be the hardest thing, Tan, do you think?
I think the hardest one is because there's a lot of examples from different countries or different people, different groups. They already start to do this kind of thing. So if we want to generate the idea based on these ideas, we may think about something we can use or something we cannot use. I think that's the big challenge for us because we still need to follow the equity, some kind of ethics and the government based on New Zealand laws. So that's a little bit hard. Yeah, yeah, and also because different examples have different data sets. For example,
Yeah.
they have more examples to use, but we only got a small population, so we cannot build we cannot use enough data set to build the model to get a good accuracy about this model. But maybe they have more choice, they have more data set to support their models. So I think this is a kind of a challenge for us. Yeah, and here I heard about some people do not like digital ID, so maybe there's already a part of the population they don't support. They do not accept any technology and innovation. So that's also a limitation for us to process our project.
Yep. As in, so they won't provide us their data, or they don't have any data to provide, type thing.
Yeah, and also they
Yeah.
may encourage other people to give up this process. Yeah,
Yeah, true. So
yeah.
Ben's comment's an interesting one. Yeah, so we heard from Singapore, and it's taken them more than 10 years, I think, Ben. Maybe 20 years even, was it?
Yeah, that was the
journey.
Dave just chuck that in there. So
Yeah.
So yeah, no pressure, you know.
Well, technology is way faster these days, so maybe the processing will go faster.
Yeah,
it was funny though, because when I was looking at it, they were talking about like they had a connection between these computers running in different hospitals, and it was like 5 megabits a second, and I was like, right, yeah, this was a while ago then. So yeah, the technology's now no longer the problem, I don't think.
I'm just going to mention something on that, which is, sorry, not related to the tech, but what I thought was really fascinating also with that talk is they talked about the 3 sort of like key players in the area, like, which was they talked about public, private, and then the people, and then they have, I guess, probably what we would sort of see as community organizations or NGOs, what they called VWOs, which was volunteer work organizations. And they said that they've got 70% of the VWOs are providing the intermediate to long-term care in Singapore. And those aren't connected or affiliated with any of the health, like in effect, official health providers. And it's like, that's quite awesome that the community's doing that, but also that's quite a terrifying
black
thought.
box type thing, isn't it? Where did this person came from? Well, we don't know. Where is this person going to? Well, we don't know. Oh yeah, interesting. We saw the guys from Health One when we were in Rotorua as well, so we were talking to them, and so I'm going to go down and have a chat with them early in the new year about kind of where they see their role in the world going to be.
I think when you're talking about the My Health Account thing too, something that was just going to drop in at the beginning that I thought was quite interesting. There was some guys doing a presentation about like a new patient-facing portal that they were using, and that they'd sort of run a trial up there, and how it was sort of helping from like those who couldn't get access to GPs, like this new system called Evolvo that had come in from the US, and we're doing this kind of thing. Then you've got us talking about what we're wanting to do with My Health Account, and then meanwhile Spark's doing this spectacular launch on presentation on Keto Waioda, which they're looking at connecting into the PMSs, and those 2 PMS vendors are literally standing like two booths away kind of thing, and you're just like, cool. So everyone's saying they've got the solution to the same problem and all building the same thing. So like, yeah, how do we get everyone working together and sort of building on each other, rather than, particularly if it's private, trying to avoid those competing interests?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing for me, Ben, is I think the My Health Account actually helps with that, because it's presumably you could use the same login for all of those things. But the market does what the market does. My suspicion is, in the Spark Health context, they've probably ended up in a situation where Spark wants to diversify away from selling broadband and mobile phones to making money from other stuff. And it feels to me like they've decided that they want to enter the health market because either they can sell that thing to GPs or they can sell it to consumers directly, I guess. maybe that's, so it's, I think it's hard to kind of maybe stop that happening from our end when actually maybe competition's really good, because maybe it forces Manage My Health to get better. Yeah, that's true, Tan. Starting to do something is always hard. Yeah. When you're not doing something and then you start, it feels like you've got a big mountain to climb, but you kind of just have to get started, eh? So
I think it'd be good just to see how we can make it more of a collaboration rather than a competition, though. Yeah.
yeah.
Would be good.
And part of that's our ability to publish kind of, I think, insights and information that would benefit all, Ben. You know what I mean? And this type of conversation or conversations we have on the eHealth forum where like anyone can kind of participate in them, that type of thing helps as well, I suppose. So, and hopefully the DHA helps with this all as well. But
is that more about like if you put the problem out there and then sort of like this is the problems described with the scope, and then that natural competition's really good around a solution, whether they can work together is another thing, or a hybrid, but just framing a problem from the
maybe
health systems point of view.
Yeah, totally. And I think the sophisticated view on that, Michael, is that's what you call procurement. Do you know what I mean? Like, so if you think about what is procurement, procurement's basically a method by issuing people a challenge. Unfortunately, we tend to issue solutions and then have them tell us what the right answer is or how we should fix it. So
that's
obviously.
I suppose rather than sparking that coming with solutions, we drive it harder the other way, saying we've got these problems.
Well, I think the interesting thing is we don't pay for that stuff at the moment, so we don't pay for any portals. It's the GPs that pay, all the patients that pay. So I suppose our job becomes more of an influence one rather than a directing kind of role. So necessarily a bit trickier. So anyway, it's now 3 minutes past 4, and we just blew straight past 4 o'clock without me even realizing. So we haven't got another one of these until, in fact, we don't have any scheduled. So I think, Mary, you're going to go and get them scheduled for the new year, and we'll make sure we're advertising these.
Now I am.
Now you are. Now this is your job.
Yeah, no, that's all good. We'll try and get them back on track for the new year, so that should be good.
Very good. So and otherwise, have a good holidays and a Merry Christmas, and see you in the new year. And Cameron, if you wanted to have, like I said, I'm coming down to Christchurch, probably to talk to the Health One guys about similar stuff, identity stuff in part. But if you wanted to have a catch up, I'm more than happy to do that in the new year if that's useful to you.
Yeah, definitely. Have you got dates set up yet, or is it just broadly?
No, it'll probably be early to mid-February, I would say.
Okay.
So
cool.
Yeah, probably a Monday is what I'm thinking, because that's normally when I have a board meeting in Christchurch. So.
Okay, cool.
Cool. Meri kere himeti mai ngā mihi o te tau hau.
Mati
You too.
wā,
Have a good Christmas, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.